Good evening, everyone. Oh, that's a lot of echo. Is that better? That sounds better. Okay, that was a big sound check. Hope everybody's having a great Friday evening. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Hopefully the sound's working. Hey, Julie, can you hear me fine? Okay, we're going to jump right in. Um, I'm going to be toggling back and forth um, with my screen. So, Julie, if you'll text me if I drop the sound or anything, because I'm going to be on a different screen and not paying attention to the chat. So, I'm going to jump right in. Obviously, Spain's been in the news. We had what appears to be a Gladio operation, drive-by shooting of one of the political nationalist non-fascist, uh, like 10 days ago. And then we just had Tucker's visit to Spain and his video that was released. I just watched it a little bit ago. And I thought had a different country I was going to do tonight. So this is kind of on the fly. But I think it's important because Spain is kind of an anomaly from a Gladio perspective. And I'm going to explain to you why. So, for we tend to think all of Europe is kind of a mass, and that generally they're all kind of the same. But from a Gladio perspective, both Spain and Portugal was very different because they had fascist leadership. So you would ask yourself, well, why would they even need Gladio, right? Um, but fascist governments, while they're very um, dictatorial, they still have to maintain control. And having people embedded in society who you think are your next door neighbor is still very advantageous to a fascist government. Not only that, as we found out with Portugal, which we covered extensively, their Gladio was called Agenter Press because it was actually in the Agenter Press building, and it was disguised as a publication. And they did all of the passports and identification for pretty much the entire Gladio network. And they were right next door to a travel agency that arranged travel. And so you see that some of the infrastructure also, Portugal was home to significant amounts of on-site training where we deployed special forces, Green Berets, trainers to Portugal and trained Gladio units in Portugal. So you're going to see some of the same things with Spain, who was under a dictator for a very long time. And as Tucker pointed out, um, Spain had a 3-year civil war. So we're going to kind of start at that point um, that you had, and my only, I'm going to point this out at the beginning. My only beef with this particular author, I love this book. This is uh, Daniel Gansler's book, is that they use, as we have found throughout, they use the words communist to describe nationalist. So they want fascist, and fascist and nationalist are not the same thing. So You could call Trump a nationalist because make America great again, America first. That's very nationalistic. Fascist has nothing to do with pride in the country. It has to do with being a dictator and adopting Marxist style economics and control, whether it's in the form of an oligarch, uh, an olig. I'm going to have another one of those word nights. Where you have industrialists that dominate the economics, and they're basically there's no difference between them and the government, which is where we're at today. Um, you have once the United States allowed corporations the same status as a person, they completely destroyed our the concept of a republic because people are very different than companies. But in order for these companies to buy politicians and to contribute to the politicians' um, pocketbook, they had to give them the status of being a person. And so now we're oligarchy. So we're basically like that now. So um, just wanted to lay that out. So in Spain, you had a military coup of General Franco and his associates that came after a leftist reforming government under Manuel Azena, who won at the polls February 16th, 1936. So you have a duly elected president, and he immediately starts implementing projects that help the author's words, weakest members of society. Yet, in the eyes of a badly controlled, powerful army, Spain, after the elections, was slipping into the embrace of socialist, communist, anarchists, and church burners. That's the army's view. But it was someone who was not going to um, support the military industrial complex. It's not that um, uh, President Enzana was a socialist or a communist or an anarchist because again, anarchist is way over here on a continuum, communist is way over here. He couldn't be in all of those things. And the only person burning churches and killing Christians was Franco, not the newly elected president. Many within the military forces were convinced that they had to save the nation. Save the nation. So a to them, the rights and wrongs couldn't have been clearer. There was a classic simplicity about Spain. A democratically elected government was overthrown by the army. The battle lines were clear. On one side stood poor, and against them, the fascist, big business, landowners, and the church. And as Tucker points out in his recent episode, the church did not speak out. Um, Whereas in Greece, and we talked about Greece a lot and their military coup, like George Papadopoulos, the colonel. In 1967, the military coup in Greece established the power of the armed forces in less than 24 hours. So it was like basically walk in, boom, we're done. In Spain, but remember what had happened prior to their the Greece's military coup and why it could happen in 24 hours is because it had been invaded by Italy, it had been invaded by um, Germans, and the British had basically supplied all of the arms and stuff for the coup to actually happen. In Spain, in July 1936, civilian opposition to the military coup was massive, and they fought for 3 years before the military dictatorship under Franco could be installed. The battle was long, intensive, and large segments of the population took up arms. Not only large segments of the Spanish population, but they had 12 international brigades that was formed from people all over Europe coming to fight against a dictator in Europe. Um, the author talks about several people who said, I was a mason and the most important, I'm a plasterer, sorry. Um, he was born in 1914. He said the most important thing I ever did was fight for Spanish freedom. There was a lady that was a nurse, same thing. She said a bit of history and helping, it was the most important part of my life. They really fought like their life depended on it. In the end, the Spanish, what he refers to as socialists and communists, but they were not just socialists and communists, they were nationalists who did not want to live under a dictator. Together with the international brigades, were unable to stop the coup of Franco because Hitler and Mussolini supported the fascist general, while the governments of Britain, France, and the United States did nothing. And this is throughout the whole Gladio thing is something that you see repeatedly. It's almost like Britain, France, and the United States wanted fascist dictators everywhere. Because remember, they could have prevented communism in Russia. You had a whole nationalistic um, leadership of former generals that fought and were still fighting against the Bolsheviks when we decided to recognize the Bolshevik, and you're going to see that here too. Same thing in China. They didn't happen to be communist. The British and the United States was supporting a nationalistic leader. Then they didn't, right at the crucial point. So we see time and time again a trend where, and we've talked about the international fascist originating from the Round Table in Britain and the Fabian Society. You see this play out time and time again, and it's what's happening right now. They want fascism. So, while in the context of the prelude to the Second World War, it has been written that the failure of Chamberlain and the French prime minister to stop Hitler and Mussolini in Munich in September of 38, the silent support from London, Paris for the Italian and German anti-communist or fascist in Spain and beyond has attracted much less attention, while the Soviet Union armed the Spanish Republicans. Now, think about that. Because these people are not communists, they're nationalists. And Soviet Union is arming them while Hitler and Mussolini is arming Franco. The German Air Force dropped horrors on Spain, a fact immortalized in Pablo Picasso's protest painting of the Nazi bombing of a Spanish village. In February 1939, the British government ended the struggle of the Spanish Republic when it announced the recognition of Franco as the legitimate Spanish leader, not duly elected. So much for democracy. Hitler and Mussolini had won their western flank and agreed with the Franco that Spain would stay neutral in World War II. Wasn't actually neutral, but as the fight against communism continued on a large scale with Hitler's repeated invasion of the Soviet Union, all of which failed but led to a terrible death toll, dictator Franco returned the favor to Mussolini and Hitler and sent his Blue Division to fight on the Russian front. So much for neutrality. After the Second World War, the fight against communists in Western Europe was often referred to as the fight against the Fifth Column. This term originally referred to a secret fascist army and originated from the Spanish Civil War because what happened was the psyops was that a Spanish, they had basically won most of the country except for Madrid itself. And Madrid was still being held by the, um, I'm going to call them nationalists. And the general who comes up and basically surrounds the city says, we have four columns out here, and there's a fifth column embedded in the city wearing civilian clothes. that as soon as we attack are gonna rise up and fight against you, which totally freaked people out. And that's the story of how you came up with the term fifth column. So, although the attack of this general was defeated, the fear of the right wing secret fifth column remained throughout the war. They had other generals, like one from Cyprus that came in. He used to inform every newcomer that the war in Spain was being waged in two directions, the enemy in the front and the fifth column in the rear. The term fifth column survived the Spanish Civil War and is basically used to designate secret armies or groups of armed subvergents which clandestinely operate in the enemy zone of influence. During World War II, Hitler had set up fifth columns, which were the secret armies in Norway. Well, he did it everywhere in all of the Axis territories. We know because we call them Gladio. When Germany was defeated, the West and NATO conquered. The language shifted the meaning to the from the political right to the political left and used the term fifth column in the Cold War context to designate the secret armies of communists. Soon, secret warfare experts denounced the free world's readiness to let communist fifth columns flourish in their midst. Only in the Gladio scandal in the 1990 was it discovered that maybe the biggest network of fifth column happened to be the stay behind units of NATO, which we know that's true. And we also know that they are fascist. Franco ruled with an iron fist, and between 1936 and the dictator's death in 1975, no free elections were held in Spain. And this is just something that's amazing to me because I was in Europe in the 90s, and to think that within 15 years of the time that I was there, that Spain had been under the dictatorship, and I had to go to Spain all the time from my the base that I was at in Italy. Our next higher echelon of command was 16th Air Force, and that happened to be in Spain. So I was in Spain once every 3 months for a school board meeting that because I was a schools officer for our base. And I find it fascinating that those people were walking around free after living from the 30s until the 70s, 40 years of fascist dictatorship. And you walk in as a tourist and you think that it's just always been that way. It's just kind of this stuff amazes me. So, amidst arbitrary arrests, fake trials, torture, assassinations, the danger of the anybody other than fascists gaining positions of influence therefore remained minimal. Hence, when in the late 1990s, Calvo Sotelo, Spanish prime minister from 1981 to December 1982, was questioned on the existence of Gladio in Spain, he kind of laughed and he said that was the government. Um, Here, Gladio was the government, which is true. Within the Cold War context, Washington did not embrace the bloody hands of Franco from the beginning. Much of the much to the contrary, after Hitler and Mussolini were dead, segments of the US wartime Secret Service considered it to be only logical that the culmination of an anti-fascist combat dictator Franco had to be removed. And hence in 1947, supposedly, as the CIA was being created, the OSS had started Operation Banana. And what's interesting about this is the maybe it wasn't the right fascist because they installed an awful lot of fascists. Um, the author says the Catalans, which is the same people that just tried to succeed from Spain, anarchists were equipped with weapons and landed on the shores of the peninsula to um, that's Operation Banana. They were gonna try to overthrow Franco using the Catalan anarchists. And do you know why that didn't work? Because London, the fascist bastards, um, ratted out this effort to get rid of Franco. Tell me that they are not pro-fascist at every step that we've learned about Operation Gladio. Every single step. So Franco strengthened his position internationally when in 1953 he sealed a pact with Washington and allowed the US to put missiles, troops, and airplanes. And guess what? Then we loved him. In turn, the US saw to it that Franco's fascist Spain, against the opposition of many countries, including prominent Soviet Union, could be overcome his international isolation and become a member of the World Peace Organization, UNO, in 1955. That's the price of admission. We get to put missiles and support our military industrial complex. As a public sign of support for the Spanish bulwark against communism, the U.S. Foreign Minister John Foster Dulles, brother of CIA Director Allen Dulles, met with Franco in 57, and Franco's trusted aide, Marine Officer Blanco, thereafter skillfully cultivated the contacts of the dictatorship with the CIA. In the end of the 1950s, the ties had strengthened, making Franco's Secret Service community one of the best allies of the CIA in Europe. Franco, together with a series of dictators from Latin America, become Washington's allies. And the American embassy in Madrid was called, they had an office of the CIA called the Office of Political Liaison. That's where the CIA station chief and all the clandestine operations were conducted. And what's interesting about that, as we go through this, you're going to see that because it was a fascist state, it becomes the repository for anytime somebody's outed as a Operation Gladio, like in Italy, when they in the 90s when they were uh, getting rid of all those people, in the 70s when they would have the bomb blow up. If they needed to hide somebody or stash somebody, they all went to Spain. And the CIA office there is the one that was kind of the mover and shaker of keeping track of everybody. So that was a very busy office there because it becomes the repository. Oh, and I also have to point this out. Remember when we did the book, The Third Way, you remember that Spain is one of the rat lines for getting rid of the Nazis out of Germany, right? So that would have been in the 1946, 47 time frame. In 1950, the Madrid Circular, which is what we've learned about in The Third Way, that book, which outlines the entire plan of basically changing from an overt war, i.e., World War II, into a covert war. And the steps that they were going to use to do that was written in 1950 in Madrid. Let that simmer a little bit. So within the framework of the CIA being in Madrid, you have military and secret service apparatuses flourishing beyond control and engaged in armed trade, drug trade, torture, terror, counterterrorism, because they don't have a constitution. They can do whatever they want. And it the author spends a little bit of time naming all of the different entities that they set up to house all these special secret operations. I'm not going to bore you with all the names of them. In 1990, it was revealed that segments of the Spanish Secret Service, together with the CIA, had been running a Spanish Gladio cell in Palm- Palmas on the Spanish Canary Islands in the Atlantic. This base had been set up as early as 1948. It had ran throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s. All above all, members of the Army Secret Service from Spain had allegedly been strongly involved in the secret stay behind networks. A retired agent from 1938 to 1952 had been a member of the Belgian Military Secret Service. And you remember we read about them too. alleged that the Segundo BIS Secret Service of the Army in Spain had always been well up to date on Gladio. French researcher Falagot supported this claim and highlighted that the Spanish secret army in the 1950s had been ran by a Dutch consul, Herman Latsman, closely linked as well as his wife to Andre Moyen. Further confirmation came from Italy, where Colonel Alberto Vallo testified in 1990 that in the 60s and 70s, Los Palmos on the Canary Island was a Gladio site for training, just like off the coast of Portugal was. The base existed and was ran by U.S. instructors that were at a U.S. SIGINT installation. Andre Moyen was interviewed by journalists of the Belgian communist newspaper. As the Cold War had ended, Moyen confirmed to his former adversaries that during his active years he had been intimately involved in Operation Gladio and the secret operations against the communist parties in various countries. And by communists, they mean nationalists. The former agent signaled his surprise that the Secret Service of Spain had not been investigated more closely, for he knew firsthand that they had played a role in the recruitment of Gladio operators. According to Moyen's own testimony, Belgian Interior Minister had in September 1945 sent him to his Italian colleague, Interior Minister Scaleba, with the task to find ways to prevent communists from coming to power. Thereafter, also, France became interested in the French Interior Minister that was linked to Moyen as the director of the French SDECE, which is their special police forces. Most sensitively, Moyen, according to his own testimony, in the 1950s, in the same context, also met with m- senior military officers in neutral Switzerland. They all, I'm telling you this because I want you to understand the entire enormity of Gladio. It's monster big, and they all knew what was going on. Moyen testified that his first contacts with the Spanish branch had taken place in 1948 when a cell of the network operated in Los Palmos and the Spanish Canary Islands in the Atlantic. At the time, Moyen had allegedly been sent to the Canary Islands in order to investigate a fraud involving fuel which had been transported by a ship from Belgium to the Canary Islands, going to Congo. The fraud enriched highly placed Spanish authorities, and furthermore, we uncovered a massive drug trade because Gladio and drugs go hand in hand. When the secret drug business was exposed by Belgian dictator Franco sent two agents to help the investigation. They were well-informed men who helped me greatly. We talked of many things, and they were very up to date on Gladio. In '68, also Franco was faced with international revolutionary students, and he basically used all of these Gladio trained people to crack down on the student protesters. Franco dictatorship during the Cold War served as a safe haven for there's left wing terrorists in the anti-communist war. It was a war against nationalism. Okay. Um, they're talking about, I don't know if y'all remember, but we had an organization in Italy that was called New Order. And in um, one of the guys that was a member of it was by the name of Marco Pozzan. In January 1984, revealed to Judge Felice Casson in Italy, who later discovered the Gladio secret army, that a whole colony of Italian fascists had installed themselves in Spain during the last years of Franco's rule. More than 100 operators had fled Italy after the Black Prince Valerio Borghese, you remember we talked about him a lot when we talked about Italy, had organized a neo-fascist attempt to overthrow the Italian government December 7th, 1970. The right-wing extremists, their left-wing fascist, who included Borghese himself, as well as several other people, regrouped in Spain under the leadership of a notorious international terrorist by the name of Stefano delle uh, Chiaie, 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 who during the coup with his men had occupied the interior ministry. And that's as far as they got, but they were, some of them got arrested. I don't know if y'all remember the story, but the ones that did escaped, and the other ones were basically allowed to leave. So again, Spain becomes this repository for these Gladio people when they get in trouble in their home countries. I can't even imagine what living there would have been like. You got the dregs of society. So in Spain, they linked up with Otto Skorzeny, which we talked about a lot. He shows up in almost every one of these stories. He's the former Nazi, and Yves Garin Serat, Serak, who is the guy that set up Agenter Press in uh, Portugal. And he was also a member of the OAS from France, that is the unit that tried to kill um, de Gaulle over 20 times and had operators, two of them, in Dallas the day JFK was killed. So Gladio linked leader, well, they're talking about Surratt, and they say that he was part of the Agenter Press, which we know. Scorense was employed by Franco's secret police as a security consultant. Um, and all of these people worked on behalf of Spain when they were living in Spain. Um, says Delle Chai carried out well over 1,000 bloodthirsty attacks, including an estimated 50 murders. The secret war in Spain was characterized by assassination and acts of terror. Members of his secret army, including Italian right wing Aldo Tisse, later confessed to Italian magistrates that during their Spanish exile they had tracked down and killed anti fascists on behalf of the Spanish Secret Service. Marco Pazan, who himself had fled to Spain in the 1970s, revealed that um, he was well paid for his services in Spain. He made very expensive trips, always by plane, including transatlantic flights, received the money from Spanish Secret Service police, and had targeted terrorists range from uh, out of an organization that's called ETA, who were fighting the Basque independence. So no democracy. Um, then it says after Franco's death in 1975, Che decided that Spain was no longer a safe place, so he goes to Chile. And remember, Chile is the CIA has already installed their dictator there, Pinochet, who was one of the ones that just did mass murder. And Operation Condor is the Operation Gladio for South America. Therefore, um, some of the people that had been in Spain as resident uh, Gladio disenfranchised from their home countries picks up when Franco's no longer there and go to some of the already couped CIA installed dictators in South America. Um, One of them moved to Bolivia and set up death squads to protect the white right wing government and engaged once again in murder unlimited. Stefano Che, born in Italy in 1936, remains the best known terrorist member of the secret armies who clandestinely fought in Europe and abroad during the Cold War. The right wing, left wing terrorists remained a danger to movements across the world, but after having fled from Spain, only rarely came back to the continent, with the exception of 1980, when he was suspected by the Italian police of coming back to Italy to carry out the bloody Bologna railway massacre. Age 51, the untouchable was finally arrested in 87 in the capital of Venezuela by local secret police. Only hours later, agents of the Italian Secret Service and CIA were present on the scene. Coccola did not express regret for his actions, but with few words drew attention to the fact that his secret wars against the left he had protected a number of governments, which in turn wanted him to carry out these certain actions, which he then carried out. The massacres had taken place. That is a fact. The Secret Service have covered up the traces. That's another fact. That's what he said. So these were government for hire assassins, which is hilarious because then it's going to be the government that prosecutes them when it was the same government that hired them. In Franco, as Franco vaguely anticipated the end of his days, he promoted his CIA liaison officer and Secret Service master architect Carrero Blanco to the post of Spanish Prime Minister in 1973. Yet Blanco, wait a minute, CIA liaison officer, the master of the Gladio, is he gets appointed the because we're still not going to have an election. Yet Blanco, due to his brutality, was hated by large segments of the population. And in December of that same year, his car drove over a landmine and he was blown apart. Oh, darn. Previously perceived as a folklorist, the Spanish and French terror organization ETA, fighting for the Basque independence, with the assassination of Blanco, established itself as a dangerous enemy of the state. After Franco's death in 75, the transformation of Spain's dreaded security apparatus proved difficult. And I think they're still dealing with remnants of it today. Um, So again, it's gonna go through several of those different organizations, and who was in charge of them. It's not relevant to our conversation, but, um, the secret war in cooperation with the Italian, extremists was allowed to continue as the press reported during the discovery of the secret Gladio armies of 1990. A week ago, quote, "A week ago, the Spanish newspaper discovered the last known link between Spain and the secret network. Carlo Cittadini, linked to Gladio, took active part in the Ataka massacre in January 1977 in Madrid." Unquote. The press report on the secret war, that was a new thing. Then it talks about another one when a commando had attacked a lawyer's office closely linked to the Spanish Communist Party, killing 5 people. The attack caused panic, for it fell right into Spain's transition movement, and it was feared to be the start of future attacks attempting Spain's transition to democracy and to have elections. So as soon as Franco's gone, the terror attacks from these Gladio units start because they want to push people into seeking a fascist type style strongman so that you give up your freedoms. Um, Secret warriors and right wing terrorists fled to Spain on board a military plane in 1972 after another Italian bomb attack that had been traced to several Italians in their Gladio unit. So that's when the judge Cassan in Italy starts discovering the different elements of Gladio and how it is an international entity. In let's see. So basically, Franco harbors them and won't release them back to Italy, even though they've listed them with Interpol and have extradition. They won't send any of them back to Italy. So, fortunately, there are some that do go back and they are caught. But Italy went ahead and prosecuted them in absentia. And so, if they were caught, they were immediately taken to prison. Um, let's see. So Spain, who now has an elected president in 1987, um, in an illustration of continued influence behind the scenes of the military apparatus, refused to hand over one such person uh, because they had married the daughter of a Spanish general. That's a good technique to not get extradited for murdering people. Like all of the secret armies in Western Europe, Spain's anti communist network at times cultivated close contacts with NATO. Italian General Saravelli, which we've talked about, who commanded the Italian Gladio from 71 to 74, after the discovery of the network in 1990, wrote a book on the Italian branch of the NATO secret army. In his book, the general relates in 1973, NATO's secret army commanders met at the CPC in Brussels in an extraordinate meeting in order to discuss the admission of Franco's Spain into the CPC. The French military secret service and the dominant CIA had allegedly requested the admission of Spanish network operators, Gladio, while Italy, represented by Saravelli, had allegedly opposed the suggestion, for it was well known that the Spanish network protected wanted Italian terrorists. Our political authorities, the general reasoned, would have found themselves in a situation of extreme embarrassment before the parliament if it was revealed that Italy not only ran a secret army, but that Spanish had their own secret army and was harboring the Italian criminals. That would be a little awkward. Hence, Spain was not officially admitted to the CPC. In a second CPC meeting, and remember, CPC was an organization within NATO, and it was kind of the parent coordination of another group that was called the ACC, which was the operational element of NATO. So the CPC is the planning in NATO, and NATO basically denied these things. They came out and said they didn't exist, and then had to come out the next day and said, "No, we withdraw that statement. We're just not gonna comment." So by not commenting and withdrawing the statement that they didn't exist, they basically acknowledge the fact that these actually exist. But they will not give you anything for Freedom of Information Act on any of this. So in the second meeting, this time in Paris, members of Franco's Secret Service were once again present. They argued that Spain should be allowed to become an official member of the Gladio Command Center because Spain had for a long time given the U.S. the right to station U.S. nuclear missiles on its soil and the military ships and submarines in its harbor, but was getting nothing in return from NATO. Sheltered behind and far away from the Soviet border, the stay behind post invasion function seemed not to have been the first thing on the mind of the Spanish secret agents attending the meeting. Rather, they were interested in the secret network in place to fight the Spanish socialist and communist nationalist. In all meetings, there is an hour of truth. One must only wait for it. Sarah Valley relates to the meeting in his book. Quote, "It was the hour in which the delegates of the secret police, relaxed with a drink or a coffee, are more inclined to speak frankly. In Paris, this hour came during the coffee break. I approached a member of the Spanish service and started by saying his government had maybe overestimated the reality of the danger of the threat from the east. I wanted to provoke him. He looking at me in complete surprise, admitted that Spain had the problem of the communists. There, we had it, the truth, unquote. So Spain became an official member of NATO in 1982, but Italian General Cervelli revealed that unofficial contact had taken place much earlier. Spain, as the journal put it, quote, did not enter the door, but came through a window, unquote. The Spanish secret army had, for instance, taken part in the stay behind exercise commanded by US forces in Europe in Bavaria, Germany in 1973, following an invitation from the United States. Because, we just love those fascist governments. The Spanish secret army seems under the code name Red Quantum, also to have been a member of the second NATO linked command center, the ACC, which I already talked to you about, after Spain's entry into NATO. And actually, what we found out is when they do the formal signing of NATO, when they admitted Spain or Portugal or any of them actually, to include now the latest group, there is a separate secret agreement that I don't know if it still exists during this whole time. It was discovered in the Italian court cases. There's a separate secret agreement that a country has to create Gladio units in order to be a member of NATO. Sink in. Love our fascists. So another name for the Spanish network, the author saying here was called Red Quantum. Whether the Spanish socialist under the prime minister, let's see, in 1982 was aware of the secret operation, remains doubt or excuse me, 1982 um, remains doubtful for the relationship was characterized. So that's what happens. Basically, what they're saying, I'll cut to the chase, is if you get a president elected like de Gaulle, I mean, he discovered it after they tried to kill him, but um, you get a president elected like JFK, they just don't tell him about it. There's no way JFK knew we had Gladio units um, and that NATO was running the organization. And that's indicative of the fact that he fired uh, General Lemetsker to NATO. He would have never done that. So it's obvious he had no clue that they even existed. And so we've seen a couple of times where you have a prime minister that they don't like the Wilson guy in the UK. So they don't even tell them that they even exist. And then they use them against them. As the press started to report on the secret armies in the 1990s in Europe, not here, Spanish communist members of parliament raised the well-founded suspicion that Spain might have functioned as a major Gladio base, harboring neo-fascists from numerous countries protected under the Franco apparatus, which they did. His concerns were confirmed when a former colonel from the Spanish military had been forced to leave the army due to his critical remarks, who declared to the press in 1990 that, of course, a Gladio link structure had existed under Franco in Spain, which, among other sensitive operations, had spied on opposition politicians. So the colonel that tells the truth had to leave. Also, Spanish state television thereafter broadcasted a Gladio report in which it confirmed that Gladio agents had trained in Spain during Franco's dictatorship. The Italian officer involved with the secret armies testified that soldiers of secret NATO armies were trained in Spain from 1966 to the mid 70s. The former agent said that he himself, together with 50 others, had been instructed at a military base in Las Palmas in the Spanish Canary Islands. According to the source, Gladio instructors were mostly from the US because they were using them from Fort Bragg. Others were less well informed, talked about the first Spanish NATO ambassador explained to the press that he had no knowledge of Gladio, and you don't know whether that's true or not. They lie. They all lie. Um, Parliamentarian Romero, a member of the Spanish United Left opposition party, became interested in this mysterious affair and contacted former agents of the secret trade, whereupon he became convinced that this secret network had operated in Spain and had acted against nationalists such as the miners and the Catalans and the Basque nationalists. In November 1990, this is when the whole thing is blowing up in Italy. Romero thus asked the Spanish government under Socialist Prime Minister Gonzalez and Defense Minister Sierra to explain exactly what role, if any, the country played with respect to Operation Gladio and stay behind units of NATO. Now this is 90, so they're in. They're not only in NATO, they're in the Gladio ACC coordination cells. Already a day later, Spain Prime Minister claimed in front of the press that Spain was not even considered for a role in Gladio. But Romero wanted a more specific answer and posed three questions, of which the first one was: does the Spanish government intend to ask NATO as a member for explanations on the activity and existence of a Gladio network? The second question, also aiming at NATO alliance, Romero wanted to know whether the Spanish executive will start a debate on a clarification of the activities of Gladio on the level of the defense ministers, the foreign ministers, and the prime ministers of NATO members. And finally, he wanted to know whether the Spanish government was considering the possibility of NATO disloyalty insofar as some allied countries had illegally operated through Gladio that without that Spain was informed of this when it entered NATO. So he's got them coming and going. So did you know that they were doing NATO or Gladio when you joined NATO? The next day, the Spanish newspaper headlined: "The Spanish Secret Service cultivates close links to NATO. Defense Minister Sierra orders investigation on Gladio network in Spain." Within Spain's fragile post-fascist political area, the topic was, of course, highly explosive because the press, based on an unnamed source, revealed that Gladio activists were recruited among military men and members of the extreme right, which they mean left. Sierra became very nervous and in the first reply to journalists was eager to point out that, quote, "when we came to power in 1982, we did not find anything of that sort," unquote, adding, "probably because we entered NATO very late when the Cold War was calming down." No, because they still have them. Um, However, sources close to the government revealed to the press that the in-house investigation was designed to hide more than it would be to reveal, because of course it's the government. Um, Tellingly, Sierra, aiming for a cover-up, had trusted the secret police with the investigation, and thus technically it had the suspect investigating the crime. Of course, it's like the CIA being told that they needed to reveal all of the bad things that they've done. Please. It did not mount to a massive surprise on Friday, November 23rd, 1990, in the response to Romero's question that Sierra in front of the parliament claimed that based on the secret police investigation, Spain had never been a member of the secret Gladio network, quote, either before or after the socialist government. Ah! Head explodes. Then he cautiously added, "It has been suggested there were some contacts in the 70s, but it's going to be very difficult for the current secret service to be able to verify that type of contact." He was increasingly vague in his statement and referred to common sense instead of using documents, testimonies, facts, and figures. So you're telling me a guy got up and said during a fascist regime there was no fascist network, and they wanted you to believe it. So they hate their people more than our government hates us. The Spanish press was not amused and criticized the defense minister for spreading propaganda. Duh. Above all, Romero was also not satisfied with the answers that he was given. So he continues, if the Secret Service knows nothing about this, then General Maglano must be sacked because he's freaking stupid. Um, Good for that reporter. He probably got liquidated later. Um, let's see. After the failure of the acting government to shed any light on the secret affair from the Spanish press, they continued to question the most prominent retired government officials of the young democracy and ask him whether he knew more about the mysterious affair. Sotelo, Spanish prime minister from February 81 to 82, who during his time in office had nominated General Maglano to the director of the secret police, claimed that Gladio did not exist in Spain. I do not have any knowledge that there is something like this that ever existed, and without any doubt, I would have known if it had existed. Sure. When the journalist insisted that the Gladio armies had existed secretly in Western Europe, he angrily explained that the Gladio network was both ridiculous and also criminal, adding that if they had informed me of such a crazy thing, I would have acted. Sure. Um, Sotelo confirms that when Spain had embarked upon its democratic new experiment as a toddler nation under Franco's death, after Franco's death, there were fears about the Spanish Communist Party might do. But the modest result of the Communist Party in the first election means that basically we don't have a communist problem, so we don't have a need for Gladio. But to the press, he stressed that Spain, upon its entry, had not been informed in writing by NATO on the existence of a secret Gladio network. Quote, there has been no written correspondence on the topic, unquote. But that's not true because anybody that goes into NATO has to sign the secret agreement that they'll set up NATO units or Gladio units. And we know that. That came out in a court case. So another lie from another government official. He went on to explain that there had been only a few meetings with NATO personnel before Spain joined the alliance in 1982, stressing that already at the end of the same year, they had they had come to power, that they basically had no Spanish parliamentary Gladio investigation and no detailed public report. So, in other words, if I don't see it, um, I can pretend that it doesn't exist. So that's their story and they're sticking to it. So I'm going to jump back over to my comments. Let's see what we got over here. Um, Pop up terror groups like Al Qaeda, ISIS. So yes, absolutely, Lucy. We have talked on here. Hamas. Gosh dang it! I did order me some earphones, people. I'm just telling you, these things are driving me nuts. Um, So we've talked on here, Al Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, all of them are basically Gladio units. Under the concept of what Gladio does and how that it's set up, um, we can trace the Muslim Brotherhood, and we've done that back to Gladio, the concept, um, because Gladio came about in 1942, originally called werewolf units. And when it was picked up by the CIA and moved into NATO, which was created in the 1948 timeframe, that's when it kind of got brought out and labeled Gladio. So Gladio specifically is the name that Italy used for their network. And it has been used universal to talk about the entire concept. It's now kind of the name, if you will. Um, each country, like I was telling you in Portugal, it's called a genter press. So each country has generally a name. Some don't, but most of them do. And and most of them have multiple governmental secret police organizations affiliated and running the Gladio networks. Um, so prior to that, we kind of trace the history back to the Boer Wars, which is in the 1800s, as a tactical concept of what's referred to more broadly as stay behind units. Stay behind units is civilian by day, killer by night, or um, secret kind of buried capability that you can fall on, get the weapons, the money, the comm equipment out, and immediately be in a military-ish, structure at the drop of a hat. It's like a volunteer fire department. The call goes out, everybody has their beeper or whatever, and then they all fall in on the weapon stashes that are stay behind units, buried with the cash and the comm equipment, and they go to war or they go attack the target, whatever you want to call it. So this whole concept goes back to the 1800s, and we see pieces of it even in um, Britain as they were preparing for the invasion from Germany in World War II. So the concept from a military perspective has been around for a lot longer, but Operation Gladio, as we know it and as we're discussing it, was born around 1942 with their werewolf units and transitioned from under General Galen, General Wolfe's jurisdiction into a much broader worldwide effort after that point. But another use of it that we came across, and I wrote an article on my Substack about it, was if you look at Zionism and the creation of Zionism, it came from the exact same people, and the um, method that was used, they created two people that I talk about in that article. One was the Mafi, which is like the senior Muslim, it's like an imam that we call it today, but they called it a Mafi because it was a creation. It was not a part of the Islamic um, religion, culture, anything. The British set up and created a name called Mafi, and they created one in Egypt and they created one in Palestine. They named that one the Grand Mafi of Jerusalem. And that Grand Mafi, using um, Gladio tactics, created false pictures of a mosque being tore down in order to get Arabs to attack newly immigrated Jewish people before the state of Israel, and vice versa. He would show Arabs um, stuff to get them to attack Jewish, and Jewish people, he would show things and get them. And he even had people dressing up like the other people. So that's why I'm very cautious whenever after you learn about Gladio and you realize that every one of these things, they dress up like the other person that they're going to blame. So in Italy, you had people that would put it was called the Communist Party there, to the extent that there was one, was called the Red Brigade. They never did any terror, um, but these Gladio people would dress up in their militant with their Red Brigade armband. They would go conduct terror, and then the police, who are all in on it, goes and arrests a whole bunch of Red Brigade members, knowing damn good and well they didn't do anything. It was a set. Yes, January 6th. Thank you very much. So then they throw all of those people in jail, knowing they did nothing wrong. Sometimes they'd be in jail for 3 years. Sometimes, like one guy, they beat and tortured him, thinking that he was involved in a bombing, and they destroyed him. He was like a vegetable for the rest of his life. These people have no um, uh, conscience. They have no soul. They are evil beyond evil. Um, because they are the people, the Azov is a stay behind unit. Right sector, a stay behind unit. They are leftovers from World War II. They were created during World War II. Okay. They would go and burn people alive in their cars. So everything, once you understand what Gladio is, you can look at every situation today. Let's look at Hamas. I don't know what happened there. I'm not going to get involved in what happened there. I'm not going to get on and say I'm pro Hamas, pro Palestinian, or pro Israel, or pro anybody. I'm pro American. But what I can tell you is if I put my Gladio glasses on, that it's completely conceivable that you have people dressed up as other people doing bad things and blaming the people that they're dressed up as for doing those bad things. Did that happen? I don't know. Does it happen all the time? Absolutely. And we know it's been reported that Hamas has been funded by the United States, it's been funded by Israel, it's been funded by Britain. So all of the same people, just like we just found out. I mean, they had the opportunity, the US and Britain and France, they had the opportunity to help Spain. They didn't. They don't give a shit. They don't care if they're going to live under a dictator. They don't care. As a matter of fact, they prefer it because they can do whatever they want, wherever they want. And what never gets and we need to write our own book, guys, because what never gets discussed in any of these books, which is they'll say it once in like a one sentence. What gets missed in all of this is what's going on in the business community of every single one of these countries. So let me tell you what goes on. In a country like Chile, in a country like Iran. So Iran had nationalized their oil industry and kicked Britain out. Well, you know that guy was going to get liquidated because that shit don't happen. So that's exactly what happened. Behind every one of these Gladio operations is these vulture international syndicate bankers who will loan the new dictator billions of dollars and vulture industrialist who wants to come in and set up their industry. So we learned when we talked about Brazil that of the top 50, top 30, whatever it was, Brazilian companies before they gladioed that guy in a coup, um, there was 6 or 8 left owned by Brazilians within the first 3 years after they couped that government because the global conglomerates come in and buy up pennies on the dollar because they just destroyed the country. So you go through the Spanish War, 3 years, um, you've ran everybody out of business, you've destroyed their industry, um, and then they're not capitalists, they're vultures. The international syndicate comes in, buys up everything, pennies on the dollar, the real estate, the hotels, everything. They come in, they own the country now. They've got a dictator that's in charge who can be bribed. You've got the um, Gladio secret police infrastructure that's not going to allow anybody to get out of line. You've got the perfect setup. And so once you own everything, you don't give a shit about the government. You don't care about the people at all. And so now they just own everything. And they've done that country after that's what they're doing in Ukraine right now. You destroy the country, and then to destroy us, they will issue our money, which we don't have, causing inflation here, destroying our country, to Ukraine to build. We just issued a UN contract or whoever is doing it, the World Bank, which basically is us, um, like multi-billion dollars to rebuild Ukraine. You see? So that's what it's all about. It's a vicious circle in which they always win and we always lose. That's what happened after 9/11. That's what happened after COVID. I'm convinced COVID's this exact same thing. It's all the same thing. It's to destroy the middle class. We give up our freedoms and they get rich. So let me go back and make sure I didn't miss anybody's questions. Um, criminally agitation. God, Lucy, I love you. That's exactly right. Um, oh, where are we at, Julie? I see your little thing. Oh, 482. Look at you go, girl. We'll be at 500 in no time. Okay. So, do I got anything else? Yeah, I really would appreciate anybody that watches this to share our video. Um, not so that I don't make any money from this. I want people. I was on the phone with another colonel today who is a fairly well known over in the Tampa area person in the Republican clubs and stuff like that. My plea to him was we have to get the word out. He had vaguely in his past heard about it, once or twice, and, in something I think he said it in a paper he read or something, it referred to a stay behind unit, but he basically did not have any clue as to and he was in special ops. So, I just let that sink in, you know? Again, I had a conversation with the three-star general that is retired. He had never heard of it. He was in charge of our military, professional education in the Air Force and had never heard of Gladio. So, we definitely have to get the word out, and so if I can trust all of y'all to go share this with at least 5 of your friends on social media, I would absolutely love it. It's not for me, it's for us, it's for our country, it's for the entire world. Everybody needs to understand what Gladio is. They need to understand what our government's been doing to us. And the most important part, and this is something that the guy I talked to today shared, is it does one very important thing. It allows you to disengage from the emotional response. We have a Pavlovic response to anything that happens to Israel, which is ridiculous. We have that same programmed response to a any terror attack. We need, once you understand Gladio, to immediately step back and say, who benefits from this? Because it's never us, but who benefits from it is who orchestrated it. And sometimes you don't immediately know. But in most of the cases, like 9/11, they within days had the Patriot Act written, which is physically impossible. I've written legislation, can't happen. So that was planned. The event happens, and now you got the law, which stole all of our freedoms. And this happens repeatedly. And so that's the very first question. Who benefits? We don't always know right away, but almost always there will be legislation, whatever. And Gladio operations are not just physical terrorist attacks that we've learned. So that's it. That's all I got for today. I appreciate y'all being here. Um, I'm going to take both Saturday and probably I may actually do one on Sunday, only because I want to start the blackmail um, books with a weekend audience, and I seem to get the biggest audience on the weekend because everybody obviously has more time to spend doing it. But we are getting a lot of views on these videos, so I do appreciate that. And, I know Julie's already said, do the follow, do the thumbs up. It definitely helps us get seen on Rumble as a recommendation. So appreciate y'all being here. Um, if you need me, Get on True Social or Twitter. I'll talk to y'all probably on Sunday. I'll try to get the schedule out first thing tomorrow morning. Bye.